Yellow. Welcome to episode 2 of lecture 3 of my applied research series. Today we will be talking about holographic reality from 0D to 3D, our universe created via articulation, and integrating the philosophy of subject-object duality and collapsing that duality and realizing it's an illusion. Before I begin, what is season 3 about? Where is it coming from? I got a cosmological framework with consciousness involved and as the big fundamental aspect of it. So that's on shivohamlabs.com. I will also link this in the description. But if you click on frameworks, you should land on this page, and the embedded PDF is in here. There's also a place where you can give me your feedback. So definitely do that. Before we begin, just a little overview of how things are going to be done. The most important thing that I cannot stress enough is that, like, prerequisites, I highly, strongly recommend, unless you've been actually, like, following things step by step. This video might have a lot going on that can seem kind of intertwined and heavy, but I have some background videos that will help. So this lecture, it's episode 2, but technically it's part 3 of 3 for my 0D to 3D holographic reality TikTok series I was making. I just felt it deserved long-form content. Whatever's a relevant recap, I'll put it here. So these are all the videos I'm going to link in the description. They're all less than 10 minutes, except for lecture 1, which is the long-form content. It's like 45, 46 minutes. And the lecture series itself in season 3, it's like gonna build from one after the other, so it is pretty important to like follow along. And yeah, definitely get into part 1 and part 2 of the 0 to 3D holographic universe stuff. Some terms I'm gonna bring up: the VOC or Vach stack to explain articulated universe, and VOC, if you don't know, if you do know, they're just 4 layers of articulation, starting with transcendental sound all the way going down to express speech. So I go into more detail there. The 2 types of time I'm using from my cosmology: generative and entropic, storytelling universe, and how our universe is telling a story. That's like what the whole thing is based off of. This one is just a really good synthesis video, in my opinion, which I see as a fact, but I'll let you decide. Anyway, so my philosophical backing for the cosmology. First, I've just always been this kind of person since I was born. I'm basically living my dream, which is cool. So we all have our own inner verse, internal cosmology, and I've always looked within. So I haven't really been given the traditional, or I have been given more of the traditional, like, ritualistic upbringing around Hinduism. Really, the correct term is Sanatana Dharma, because it just means eternal purpose and duty of everything, the soul, and that's just really what it's about. But Tantra and Shiva approached me. It didn't go the other way around. It wasn't really, I was an atheist for a good chunk of time. I have a whole series on that on my YouTube as well. And also Bible verses. So for context on that, you know, ego can play a role in spirituality and science, especially when people from a certain background treat you very, very poorly. But if I use the verse being like the alpha and the omega, you know, on a circle, when you put in a dot and you decide that to be the beginning, it can be anywhere. As soon as you decide the beginning, the end is like right there next to it. So in Sanskrit, there's the concept of samsara. You can just think of it as cycles. And the goal is to exit samsara and achieve ultimate liberation for the soul, which is the ultimate communion with the divine. And usually it's used in the sense of reincarnation, so you don't keep returning back. Anyway, point is, if you're thinking of like alpha as the beginning, omega as the end, my perception was I'm in the omega. I'm with non-dual Shiva Tantra. It's super advanced, and I'm ready to be liberated. And I've had woundings from Christianity growing up. I think a lot of people do. So Shiva is known as the destroyer for a reason, primarily of the ego. So his perspective is like, you can't claim to know me and also have disdain towards this group. So you have to like love and forgive them and all that kind of stuff. And that happened over the course of real life experience. So yeah, ultimately that kind of, it needs to be free will where you do that, and free will best happens through the power of love. So I got placed with an individual in my life that has a Christian background and also is responsible and continues to be responsible for a lot of, I almost want to say, cellular healing of all sorts of pain I've gone through. And also, this individual was very much one to talk so much about, like, if I could say a common phrase both of us had, mine was being one with the cosmos, and this person's was like, relationships are important, love is important, everyone should be in a relationship. And I was like very averse to that kind of thinking due to my own woundings. But you know, the divine asks us to not lean on our own understanding, and so there was a period of time in not being in contact with this person where I was feeling pretty down. And I felt like I wanted to understand, because this group of people is always saying, we have the ultimate truth. Like, this is it. Everything else is wrong. And so me, in pursuit of deep cosmic truths many months ago, I had this moment where I actually did what Christians say to do, which is ask Jesus to reveal himself to you. And then if that is the truth, like, I literally said out loud, like, I will convert to Christianity today, if this is actually the ultimate truth. So, yeah, I did this for this individual. I just never told him, and I don't plan on telling him, but that happened many months ago. And the result was kind of phenomenal and very, very intense and crazy, and continues to be intense and crazy. But ultimately, J-Dog himself kind of signed off on this cosmology, and that is why there's Bible verses, because that was like his voice. Even in part 1 and 2 of this series, like, I talk about, like, 15% of this is like Jesus's hand, 85% is Shiva's, which, you know, now that I think about it, makes sense. If there's somebody saying that love is so important and relationships are important, and then I'm saying being one with the cosmos are important, when we're articulating our understanding of reality, we're coming from like a filtered lens. So I acknowledge that. What I would like to say is, from my own wounding to healing, and what I'm meant to do, being both Indian and American, is kind of convey how if you claim to know Shiva, your heart will be open to Jesus. If your heart is open to Jesus and you claim to know him, it will naturally lead you towards Shiva. And that's really just a matter of, like, talking about archetypically, like, archetype, whatever, the heart and supreme architecture, cosmic, intelligent reality that's non-dualistic. So that is why it comes from life experience and just inquiry, and, you know, that's not that all that there is to it. There's hard science principles as well. Before I touch on that, the goal is not to try to fit in with what can seem to be some of the rigid dogma of academia. And there is no invitation, and it's not okay to put rigid dogma onto me about any religious background, because that's not what this is about. This is a cosmology not for religious people. I wouldn't even say for spiritual people, and not for me trying to fit in. And I'm not trying to fit into any of these boxes, is what I mean. I'm also not trying to fit into academia. This cosmology is for romantics and lovers, as I genuinely believe that it is those who are romantics that will save the world. All right, now that that's over. So I have a computer science degree background. Let's go Georgia Tech. And I've been studying cosmology on my own, and then just combining these two ideas. We'll also be reviewing the framework I have and the diagrams within it, as well as I'll be introducing some new ones I made for the purpose of simulating awareness and consciousness, and at a basic level showcase how reality gets it's structured and articulated through language, and we'll talk about what language is. All right, I'm just letting you know, this is what the diagram looks like. There's a lot going on, a lot of words, okay? I'm not even gonna cover every single aspect of all of this. It's just going to be pretty much here, just this aspect here. The videos I'm talking about that are prerequisites will kind of talk about generative time versus entropic time. I'll also talk about how the four layers of articulation, their articulation would indicate happening in linear time, but as you get closer to early universe cosmology, maybe even pre-universe cosmology, it's time's going to be sticky and it's going to be different. And I represent those layers as like will, knowledge, and action. And so please take a look at the videos in the description to understand better. But I'll be breaking all of these down. So we'll revisit this diagram again, but piece by piece we'll unpack. And it's important to note that if we're talking about reality, it's being articulated. So here are two deities from Hindu cosmology. They're married. And if you're married, it's not by mistake, it's because you're two sides of the same coin. That's the divine union. This guy right here, his name's Brahma. He's considered the creator. And that's his lover, Saraswati. She is the goddess of speech, wisdom, arts, music, all of that kind of stuff. And this is to say that this union indicates there's nothing really created unless it's articulated first. And through the process of articulation, you are creating something, whether it's an experience or some like physical object, whatever, something gets created. One more thing. So this also all came about because originally, before I even made the cosmological framework, I was working on a coding project, and that was dependent upon understanding that the brain filters the infinite field of cosmic consciousness. So I was like, I can't build a coding project without like having a model for that. But I can't build a model of that without having a model for cosmic consciousness first. So I just did that real quick, light work in like 2 months. And I kind of came to realize it's not just the brain that's filtering through the layers of Vak, because that's what I felt when I first discovered it. Like, why is nobody else seeing this? This is a brilliant idea. But it's also everything else. Everything in the cosmos is like quote unquote filtering, or maybe even like being created through these four layers. Okay, relevant Bible verse here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So religious people may call everything God's creation. You can also call it God's articulation. So it's really nice how those two different philosophies kind of say the same thing and they go like hand in hand. This is also pulled from my cosmology. You can take a pause and read this if you'd like, but I'll just go ahead and explain it. So if we're talking about words creating reality and sentences and grammar and all of that, there's like a discretized or quantized version of all of it, which is alphabetical letters. From my perspective, I've kind of realized alphabets are captured sound waves with a glyph attached to them, and that's how the capturing happens. And as we are building reality, and I'm saying awareness is fundamental, consciousness and self-awareness are emergent. So when you think of consciousness unfolding over time, you're thinking of linear time. When we think of linear time, we're thinking of like things going through the creation process, preservation process, decay, entropic process. And that's the reason why over here I talk about sorted versus unsorted words. Because sorting matters, order matters. That's what creates the structure. Like, I understand how highly reductive this sounds, but if I think about like a galaxy, that is a story in a sense. It has the structure of a galaxy. It had to operate with certain information being pulled out over time. And if those things happened in any other order, you wouldn't have the structure of that galaxy and it wouldn't be sustained. And cosmological systems at super large scales, what do they like to do? They like to sustain themselves, they have elegant solutions, they reach homeostasis, and they operate efficiently. And that requires what I'm saying, like clean language. It's not just grammatical structure. Like grammar also implies there is some flow and trajectory to it, and that is important for there to be meaningful experience in our universe. But first, there's somebody named Ken. Ken, if you're watching, hello. He wrote me, I think, what I saw was probably the longest email of my life. Really, really digging into that cosmology. So, yeah, I appreciate that. And there was a question he asked I felt like would be very helpful for all of us. So he asked, is every sphere point infinite based on its story set, or is it limited by the predetermined expansion limit? Pretty heavy question. So that's why I say just look at the sphere point video first, because if I'm talking about 0D to 3D holographic reality, that comes from the sphere point architecture first, talking about how a 0D point is also a 3D sphere and why that is. And I talked about stories, so I'm saying this is a storytelling model of the universe. It's not just random like thoughts and like sounds. There's kind of like a trajectory and flow to it, and it's infinitely like expanding, but also there's this idea of like bounded infinity, which kind of can seem paradoxical. So this is a great question, and the way I want to answer this is non-dualistically. I took some notes on it. So there's the free will versus like destiny debate, and I have a video on how it's actually both and. There's nothing really to debate there. The only real difference between destiny versus free will is your ability to say the word I. Because if you say I, then you feel like you made that choice instead of stuff just happening. So this is also from my paper. You can feel free to take a pause and read it first, but I'm going to just explain from my notes what I've written. It's important to know how I'm defining the terms awareness, consciousness, and self-awareness. But I say awareness is fundamental and self-awareness is emergent. As awareness unfolds, it engages in path traversal. Awareness is demonstrated with infinite sphere points. All is latent potential. They're not materially all happening all at once. Because if that were the case, then there would be no dynamism. As awareness unfolds and engages in path traversal, when it leads to dynamism, that's what we can consider also experience. And experience is also known as our evidence of consciousness. So dynamism immediately implies some type of interaction, which requires a minimum of two states, which also, at a very deep level, is signaling that there's a separation between that and not that thing, and they're interacting. So that's why I'm saying it's not everything happening at once, but just like in different states, which, separation and traversal and time and unfolding is necessary. And self-awareness is just that knowledge, and the mode with which that knowledge becomes more and more knowledgeable that can now reflect back on itself, promoting more agency, which can be either benevolent or malevolent. So when we look at this, I kind of build this as like self-awareness pulling from consciousness, and then consciousness pulls from awareness. And it's all one way of being. So if you look at it just from the awareness and consciousness perspective, then it just looks like it is what it is, that things are unfolding. But if stuff is happening from the self-awareness perspective, when you can say I, you're going to think of it not as much of just stuff happening, but that you had a choice in it and that there's free will involved. So I would say the story set that we're talking about can be examined as having agency and free will, because you can keep making stories. We make stories all the time when we're talking, and like even through the means of like reproduction and all of that kind of stuff, like the story keeps going on, quote unquote, legacy as people like to call it. And then expansion limit is something that can be seen as predetermined. The reason I even brought up free will and destiny is because I feel like that principle sort of can apply here, like the free will of storytelling, recursive storytelling, self-awareness, agency, but then how is there some type of expansion limit? So the story set unfolding creates the expansion, but ultimately stories end and cycles end of a particular universe because of the alphabet's limit. Although more alphabet sounds can be generated, but then that would indicate like a different reality or universe. I'm going to briefly touch on these diagrams I have here because there's I am the alpha and omega, and I use Sanskrit as part of the main language here, and I do also have a video of like it's not the only one, but it really fit the kind of work I was looking at. So in Sanskrit, when you look at its alpha and omega, it's a and ha, and it creates aham, which also means I am. And this alphabet is, I got this like more intuitive sense. This is something that was also sort of just told to me, that this is how the divine gives everything free will. I mean everything, not just a person, not just a plant, even down to like the letter A itself is a conscious agent. And so it's coming from God's inner verse and going into the outer verse. And also Ken had pointed out, like, it's interesting that I'm bringing out that we are of the material of God's outer verse. And how are we then of this material inferring God's inner verse, which is immaterial? Because if I'm able to make a diagram, if I'm able to talk about it, that is still of some material. Thanks for that, Ken. So I'm just, inferring from the material here what could be going on beyond. But I do understand, like, you can't ever fully know necessarily everything. This is just my best attempt at explaining it in material reality. And this is also part of what's in my cosmology. By the way, when I'm using the term God, I do not mean the Abrahamic religious version. I would encourage you to look at like my ethics portion of the paper, where it's like just divine, infinite, cosmic intelligence, and that's really long to repeat, and there's more words I add to it, so just saying God is a lot easier. Okay, anyway. So, yeah, I kind of talk about how holographic boundary is dictated by like the alphabet set of that universe. So that's kind of like, it's all the permutations and combinations that can happen, and with more sound and more letters, there's more stories that can be told, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to really touch on this stuff over here. I'm just using this to answer the question, and if there are questions about this, I will touch on it in lecture 3. Here's the first new diagram that I made. So we've talked about the 4 layers of articulation, and in order for me to explain this to you, I have to operate in linear time. Sorry, I wish I could do something else, but I can't. So when I talk about the term sphere point, I'm thinking of point as that singularity, that grand unification of everythingness. And that's what para is. It's transcendental sound. That's the basis of it. Even in Hindu cosmology, there's a deity called Nada Brahma, where it's like the whole basis of it is the universe as sound. So even when you think about sound as like, if I say something like it's like a sound wave, but it's 2 things. It's not only just a sound wave, but the medium or the space where the wave is not there. So when you think of the infinite story set all at once, this has everything contained within it. So I have to wonder, what does that quote unquote sound like? Because sound needs a medium, but even the medium is in the unification. So is it infinitely loud, infinitely silent, And I would say Vaikari, the expressed speech, is what makes it a sphere, like the literalized form, the understanding of everything. Another thing, so I use the term sphere point to say like a point is a sphere, and so if I'm saying that a point is para, the transcendental sound, and the expressed speech, Vaikari is a sphere, why not call it para Vaikari or something like that? Why like separate? But that's because para includes Pashyanti, Madhyama, and Vaikari. You could even say it contains like a 4th element, which is like time or traversal, but all of that is contained within para. Please leave questions if none of this is, or if there's a question. I hope something makes sense. I don't want it to be none of it makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to represent this with some zoomation. We have kind of para over here. Now, this is my best attempt to try to explain it. I am not suggesting that this is literally how it behaves. This is kind of like a symbolic representation. You have a point. When you zoom into a point, you recognize that it's got a 1D element, a line, and it's also 2D because it's a circle. It's like if you zoom in, that's what happens. When you inspect even further, like this is both happening at once. Like this and this happen at once. That's why I'm saying it's kind of hard. I'm doing my best. I have to use linear time to explain this. So, okay, like you have the ability to understand the plane that exists in front of you for 2 dimensions. Now, the final aspect of like zooming, and zooming doesn't have to be linear. It can also be like how and where you're looking. So here it's like if you took that plane and you were like, well, okay, and now like I can rotate it and look at it this way. And then finally you understand the whole thing is a sphere. So I just want you to, I have a question after this, so I'm going to go back and forth and then see if you can answer this question. Okay, let's go. What is the difference with traversal before material reality and after? I'm asking before and after of material reality because in lecture 1, I talk about the sphere point architecture being pre-material. It's just the architecture of reality itself, and it can also be applied within material reality. So what's the difference between this happening pre-material universe and post? Don't everyone answer all at once. Get it? Because I can't hear you. Okay. Okay, it would just turn into time. This is why I said like understanding generative and entropic time would be good, because entropic time, there's no reversibility. Like I have another slide after this, right? I'm not going back and forth. So time moves like it doesn't go back, it just moves this way. But when you're like zooming and there's no consequence of material, no law of thermodynamics or anything, you can just kind of move back and forth and inspect every point as a sphere and kind of come back in. But once something begins, you are of that material, and now you must obey the laws that the material will have. It's just, yep, use this on biorender. Shout out biorender. I just don't want to get in trouble. That's what I used. Okay, so we're going to come back to the definition of awareness, consciousness, and self-awareness, but with a focus on awareness and consciousness, because, like I said, it's, I mean, I call it a non-representational field, but I got to represent it to y'all somehow. So a sphere best represents, like, everythingness, and its infinite potentiality of any and all statistical infinite possibilities of the universe. And consciousness is having that subjective experience and qualitative feel via dynamism experience, which is happening over time, which requires a traversal through awareness. And awareness is represented also by those sphere points. So they're infinitely close and infinitely dense and all of the things. So keep that in mind as I present the next diagram. Relevant Bible verse. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. All right, you heard the man. It's time to let there be some light. Let's go. All right. Now, I wanted to build a struct that I could kind of represent sphere points with, like a simple way of having like a structure for it and its properties. But then I thought, that's crazy, because that indicates knowing what something is at a particular point in space-time, and that it would be something consistent. When in actuality, how you know a sphere point will come from the observer and its involvement. One more thing. Holograms talk about, like in material, how we make holograms, we use light. Holographic reality is not necessarily saying light projects everything. It's saying that information about the higher dimension is stored in the lower dimension. I'm combining both of those principles. So here we are. This is infinite sphere points everywhere, and they're supposed to be dark red dots. But if you remember lecture 1's video, like there are things at the center. Like if you have a point, you realize it's a sphere. The sphere has a center, it has a fill, it also has a boundary, and all of those will have infinite points, which then are also spheres. It like never ends, you know what I mean? And they're not going to be separated from each other because there's like points at the edge of one point and then the edge of another one, and that point too can be a sphere, and so it goes on and on and on, infinitely close, infinitely dense. So it won't look like scattered dots, but an extremely dense, like solid block of color. And I try to kind of mimic what it would look like to move around in this intense block of everythingness. So I have this little like rotation icon. I say that the zoom is 0. You're like just in the world of potentiality. No universe has begun yet. And also here I'm saying with this little bar, this UI thing, like, yeah, you could zoom in into this 20% more and it'll look exactly the same. You could have taken this whole plane of infinite potential existence and like rotated it and it looks exactly the same. This is zoomed at 80%, so I'm really trying to prove this point, or rather, sphere point, sorry, that no matter where you go and how you look, it's like nothing has been discovered yet. You're just like awareness. This is stillness. It's the capacity for everythingness all at once. Okay. Now let's say I want to traverse, which is now selecting consciousness, like, because now right now it's like non-dualistic. There's nothing going on. I don't even know I'm here, supposedly. But the idea here is to say that you as the observer have an active role in understanding reality, and that's what shapes what it is. So if I was in a legitimate simulation and I decided to click on any one of these sphere points, right? The moment you do that, you're also, I made this little cute traverse button. You also are trying to traverse. And yeah, I just kind of set the zoom to 50% and just rotated this to whatever degree. Okay. So we have clicked on one sphere point in the infinite zone. You, the observer, are now entering sphere point reality. Material universe begins now. Ooh. Oh, she's pulsating. Let's go. Okay. So we got those 4 layers of articulation. And God said, let there be light. So we got to listen. All right. So the way I kind of broke down light is if everything comes back to awareness, that's the grand unification of everything. So light at the most para level would also be awareness. Okay. So you, the observer, and as an observer, you would technically be a sphere point. Mind you, all these sphere points, they are all aware. Any one of these could do what I'm trying to do with you in this right now. So they're all aware. So you, the observer, also a sphere point here in infinite reality, become aware of another sphere point, which is also awareness. You, the subject sphere point, me or you, and the selected one, so far up until this point, have just been one. Now we understand that there's like selection begets, separation of some sort. That's the same point. It's done pulsating, but architecturally, I bring up will, knowledge, and action because ether or whatever, it could be some type of fluid. There's ways people go about understanding what actually makes up space, but we know it takes up those 3 spatial dimensions. How did those 3 spatial dimensions come into emergence to begin with? And if you remember from that other diagram, I was saying, well, Pashanti, Madhyama, and Vaikari are all contained within para, and there's a 4th element para would have, which is like also time. This is something that was kind of intuitively told to me. But those 3 aspects make up the 3 dimensions of the universe, and the nature of separating from para is what creates time, because now you have the concept of one after another, which indicates something like t equals 0 and time t equals 1. Okay, so we were here, awareness. Now we have the potentiality for 3 spatial dimensions. We're at level 2 of let there be light, at the Pashanti level, which is expansion. So after the sphere point selection, you expand your connection to that thing, expanding the sphere point itself. Will, knowledge, and action are shown as separate axes for clarity, but they co-arise as one articulation event. Subject-object duality appears operationally. Observer is the subject, selected sphere point is the object. And it really makes you wonder, like, as you are becoming aware of something, it too is expanding and becoming aware of you. So you and the thing you observe are like one. So here it's like I represent it with opacity. Once again, understanding it may not literally be this way. I'm talking about something before the concept of entropic time. So put that out there. Big, big, big. So we reached level 3 of the Let There Be Light version, where it's level 3 out of 4 in the Vak stack, Madhyama. So I call that knowledge. So it's been awareness, expansion, knowledge. Knowledge of this reality becomes known as we engage in the first duality, which is separation. And even in like thermodynamics, there's always a duality of something. Holographic reality is also based on dualities, the concept of this versus that, because that's what's going on. Like there's this and then there's that. That is separation. So now you're becoming knowledgeable about this separation. You yourself being separated from infinity too. Keeps going, keeps going. Oh my god, as we inspect from infinite potential reality, what happens? Whoa, we're in it now. Crazy. Okay, I reset the zoom to 0 and I reset the rotation. I'm really proud of these mock-ups, man. So yeah, we are finally in here. And now we're at level 4, Vicari Light, which I believe to be literal material light, like wave particle duality, waves, photons. So ether and material will commence emerging, illuminated by literal light, a phenomenon also known as Let There Be Light. And I have aptly named this diagram, it's not clocking to y'all that Jesus was standing on business. All right, let's go. So yeah, what we have just covered so far is kind of going from this point to a sphere. And it's not literally going point, line, circle, then sphere. It's just, like I said, it co-arises all at once, but the realization I'm trying to represent as like, in as best as possible, but I'm linear, you're linear, we're in a material universe. This is the best I can kind of do to represent it. It's all kind of happening at once. So yeah, here 0D is awareness, and then we go from that to expansion, knowledge, literal light, and let's see, yeah, that kind of stuff was happening in generative time. So when you end up being here, this is where like the laws of whatever that universe would begin. Okay, so that is something I included for us to get ourselves involved with, because once again, like as you saw, like you were directly involved in understanding what state of a point or sphere point and sphere you were in. And there's infinite ones in between, and they all have their like cycle beginning and ending time, but that's not something I can programmatically define. It would be unethical. That is a co-creative process with the divine, so I'm never going to attempt to figure that out. What I will say though is I say that my cosmology and how our material universe gets realized is through this storytelling, recursive, algorithmic engine powered by the 4 layers of articulation. And they go in this order, and this is the way I see it. It's almost like this, like a decision tree. And the idea is this blueprint of articulation could be applied to like anything that's sort of created, and it would be replicable in all of those situations. Something to also note is part of being mortals. Boo! Everything's material. So, like, even for me to use the term Pashyanti, Madhyama, and Vaikari, Vaikari literally means express speech, bro. I'm using express speech to tell you about these layers that aren't express speech, but like they're already articulated. They are they're in their final mode. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing too. So how does one thing turn into another? Right? Like how is our universe first of all at a philosophical level that dynamic? Like it's never at a standstill. There's like a push. That's the concept of trajectory. Something happening. Why is that like a thing? Like also so remember too like everything is based on like sound and oscillation. Oscillation is like movement and yeah, it's so amazing that even this like basic concept of oscillation kind of brings about change from infinite potentiality to having something like a self-awareness and then creating something like you and I. Of course it's a lot more complicated than that, but well now the question is how do we go from something like para to Pashyanti? How do we get here? What is that? And the same question can be applied from Pashyanti to Madhyama and Madhyama to Vaikari. Okay, let's think about a rainbow. Part of many things in my real life that help me understand cosmology, but when we look at a rainbow from a distance, we see Roy G. Biv, discretized, meaning different colors, like hence the Roy G. Biv. But if I zoomed in, and if I kept zooming in even more, what would happen? It's like, wait, I'm in red. I'm still in red. Wait, I don't even realize it. Now I think I've hit orange, right? And you're in orange for a bit, but where's the line where it's like yellow versus orange yellow? And what level of orange yellowness turns into real, official, pure yellow? What is that? So, something that seems discrete over here, upon deeper inspection, we realize it's this continuous field, actually. So, how can we apply that to the question I asked? Oh, there it is. You could say that this whole stack actually is being applied algorithmically in the process to go from one layer of the stack to the other. Not just here, but like even here, as well as here. But like, this is also not where it ends either. Because you could apply this whole thing right over here, and here, and here, and here. Then take that whole thing and apply it here again. So it would look like para, 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 like forever, right? And then like para, 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 shanti, and then para, para, para. You get what I'm saying? That would keep going on and on and on. That's the whole idea of like if you think this is red and this is orange, then what I'm describing here is all the little steps in between before red turns into orange, basically. So, yeah. I have been working on some pseudocode for this, and I realized that it was probably better to just get this diagram more displayed because there's more to the pseudocode that requires other types of explanations, which would overload people, as if you're not overloaded enough. But so understand that this is a generative model of the universe, meaning like language is being articulated, created in real time with your alphabet set. You would be adding nodes. So the algorithm is both generative and recursive, manifesting all statistical possibilities of the root state, para, the singularity of our universe, the ultimate sphere point, before everything else becomes everythingness. And the thing is, like I said, everything that's already spit out here is technically expressed speech talking about things that are not expressed speech. So what I'm saying also happens is like whatever the output is, you apply the articulation algorithm onto that again. So you will always take in the root node as a parameter. So this is like the root node, like the seed sound of our universe. And then it would just keep going on and on and on. And all of these are sphere points. I'm using circles to just like so you can read the letters inside of a circle, but yeah, no, best trying to best diagram it. And like I said, para the it includes the other layers of Vok within it, and time is not accounted for in the output because the very concept of having an algorithm means that you're traversing, which requires time. So that's already taken into account there, anyways. So yeah, this is all the aspect of including like 0D to 3D, understanding that the architecture, like the shape, literally it would probably be amorphous, but like potentiality wise, sphere point. And what is the thing that helps creation come into existence? The layers of Vok or Vach. So that is all. Shout out BioRender, don't sue me. All right, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in the next one.